Campers, it's me, Ari Lehman, the first Jason Voorhees. From Friday the 13th, I'm here with AJ, and he's got the juiciest slice ready for you. It's dripping with blood. Jason never dies.
You're going to Camp Blood, ain't you?
Maybe.
You'll never come back again.
Well, if anyone would know. It's funny how characters in these flicks don't follow their own warnings. Anyway, salutations all. The Friday the 13th series has given us many memorable characters, from Alice, who lopped off Mrs. Voorhees' head, to Whitney, who spent a period of time in Jason's care. But
other than Jason himself, Tommy Jarvis is the most significant figure in the Crystal Lake saga.
Sure.
a while ago, I covered Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, since that entry is despised by many, and I happen to consider it a solid addition to the franchise, far better than its detractors would have you believe. In the process of putting together that video, I realized something I'd never noticed in all my viewings. Tommy is a victim of far more than Jason Voorhees. The influence of otherworldly machinations over the local populace, perhaps?
I'm here to tell you, we're not going to stand for that kind of weirdness around here.
Let's talk about it. Thanks for checking this out. I deeply appreciate it. And if anything about this trips your fancy, please like, subscribe, and share. I'd appreciate that too.
Yes.
In my previous video, I concluded officialdom did their best to cover up what happened after the events of the final chapter, because it behooved those at every level of local government to put a lid on the whole thing.
Pamela's death was the beginning and the end of the Voorhees legacy at Crystal Lake, despite what you might hear from certain people.
And why? Liability issues.
When Tommy kept insisting that the guy he hacked up was Jason Voorhees, well, they locked him up.
Problem solved.
The problem is that if the man who attacked the Jarvises and the young vacationers in the final chapter is Jason Voorhees, and or even just the same man who killed the young vacationers at Higgins Haven, someone could be liable for not taking more precautions to assure the mass murderer was truly expired. Thus,
As it turned out, the suspect was never identified because that same night his body was stolen out of the hospital.
if the families of the 12 victims, including the Jarvises, brought civil lawsuits, Crystal Lake could be bankrupted. Despite that some sort of supernatural healing factor likely got Jason back on his feet, missing that a guy was alive enough to dispatch a dozen more people would seem like a pretty major oversight by any reasonable metric.
That's about the biggest pile of horse manure I've ever heard.
So, what was the plan? Deny, 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 obscure, 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 rewrite, rewrite, rewrite. And what was a big part of what they were denying, obscuring, and rewriting? Tommy's character, who he is as a person. So anyone he encounters considers him a crazy person the second he brings up Jason.
Whoa, what's your name, son?
Oh, Tommy Jarvis.
Aren't you the kid whose mother and friends were killed by that maniac?
Yeah, Jason murdered him.
But we know better. Before everything went haywire, we met a bright tween.
It's a nice mask. Well, I have to get a haircut. You're getting pretty terrific at making those things. Thanks. I just customized it.
With a pretty decent, rather bucolic, and relatively happy sort of life, despite his parents divorcing. He had his dog.
Hey, Gordon. Where have you been, huh, Gordon? You've been sneaking around. Do you have a girlfriend or something?
Played video games.
Mom, I got 98,000. How
many robots is that?
35!
And created awesome practical special effects. It seems some saw his imagination as a challenge.
He used to draw the strangest things when he would come to class. Always had me a little bit concerned.
Isn't that just like too many small-minded teachers? In my experience, drawing scary things gets you sent to the counselor's office. Basically, Tommy was a normal, imaginative kid who, even sans a father to look up to, was managing well until Jason turned his world upside down and pushed him to a very extreme place. And how were his heroic actions received? Tommy was treated like a delinquent and criminal by law enforcement.
What that son of a bitch did, there's no words to describe.
Drugged up by doctors.
He was put on the standard drug therapies of the time, but often had to be kept in isolation after several violent episodes with fellow patients and hospital staff.
And basically locked away until they could no longer hold him.
When Tommy reached the age of 18, the state was no longer legally able to hold him, so he was transferred to the Pinehurst Youth Center. It's kind of a halfway house for at-risk kids. And let's just say he didn't last there very long.
Separating him from the world at large. Why? The picture they paint is of an unhinged, violent young man. But we know he started out a pretty normal kid. And we were with him when he had no other choice than to concoct a plan to distract a rampaging Jason. And when he courageously put his quick thinking into action.
Jason!
We were at his side when he picked up the machete and did what was necessary to save his and Trish's lives. Everything. Even the overkill.
However much that maniac got what he deserved, Jarvis kid, he just went over the edge.
No matter what anyone would have you think, was ultimately justifiable, and Tommy deserved the vindication of a hero's welcome by the public for standing up to a mass murderer. Odds are he would have gotten a huge outpouring of support and genuine help. Sure, there probably would have still been PTSD, nightmares, but it would have reinforced that his actions were the right thing to do. But there was one thing that made that impossible. Tommy's insistence that the perpetrator was Jason Voorhees. If the public bought into this perception, it might extend further. The problem being that inconvenient fact that if the man who attacked Tommy is Jason Voorhees, and he killed the victims at Higgins Haven, someone could be found responsible for not taking more precautions to assure the mass murderer was truly expired.
How does a body that's been examined by a coroner, pronounced dead on arrival, get up out of a freezer and walk out of the county morgue?
I believe any such report fabricated. Axel was clearly distracted.
Hi, girls. Thanks for waiting.
In several ways.
I don't believe you, Axel.
I think he paid the body little mind, and they had to create a record that the supposed cadaver was more thoroughly examined to perpetuate the idea the body was snatched, instead of walked out of its own accord. How could so much corruption and oversight go unimpeded? An overarching conspiracy of suppression might seem far-fetched, until you consider it isn't just bureaucrats in closed-door meetings.
In Forest Green wants to be reminded of what that maniac did here. That's why we changed the name. People want to forget this was Crystal Lake. And they don't need some kid stirring up Jason shit again.
Making these decisions. But the curse of Jason, the curse of Crystal Lake, Something I believe goes further than our resident hockey mask-clad slayer and his headless mama.
Oh, Lord.
I wrote in my previous video, Mrs. Voorhees wanted revenge, and used the Necronomicon to resurrect Jason, and who knows what else. The book seems to harness the ancient forces of a given area. I don't believe she summoned Deadites specifically, but perhaps something else. Who's to say what she awoke, or maybe just attracted? Whatever it was, following his encounter with Jason, it haunted Tommy, and perhaps had influence over those around the angsty young man. So, whatever this power, it exerted influence that led to Tommy's isolation and vilification.
That's not good enough!
Keeping a tight leash on him was paramount. Child anonymity laws were likely used to keep his and Trish's identity hidden from the press, at least until they were adults. That wouldn't have been long for Trish, but Tommy? 5-6 years is a long damn time when you're a kid. As for Trish,
Tommy never had many visitors, other than his sister Trish, but his progress was minimal, and after a while she just stopped visiting.
I think this is an oversimplification. A teenager grieving her mom who experienced a horrendously traumatic series of events that included witnessing would-be white knight and love interest Rob die horrifically. And goring a terrifying man attacking her. She would have been left in a vulnerable mental state herself. Separated from Tommy, they could have chipped away at Trish until she was willing to go along with their narrative. Maybe they even convinced her Tommy was a lost cause.
Bangkok has him now.
Maybe they implied she could end up a lost cause herself. A question that should be broached is, where is Tommy and Trish's father through all this? To be such a non-participant in his son's life after such a harrowing event, he would have had to sign over rights and basically make Tommy a ward of the state. Why would any decent father do that? Was he just a terrible guy? I have a suspicion forces conspired to display a picture of declining mental health in Tommy that led to his dad stepping away. If Tommy was drugged to his gills, even if early on his father and Trish made an effort to connect, he was likely verging on catatonic, unintelligible, and or unwilling to speak. I'm guessing he was invalidated at every turn, and picked away at like a corpse beset by vultures, until all sense of safety and security was so removed, he took a nonverbal stance as a preventative measure to avoid harassment and accusation. I wouldn't be surprised if final girl Chris was also suppressed and her mental health issues not properly addressed to keep a lid on what she might reveal, such as her earlier run-in with Jason.
Standing there was this hideous-looking man. He was so grotesque, he was almost inhuman.
Confirmed when she got a glimpse of his face. This brings us to where the story picks up with a brooding, taciturn, and laconic, those are fancy words for near mute, Tommy.
Hey! No? Beautiful. Sit there, I don't give a shit.
6 years later, as he's put into the care of Dr. Matt Letter and Pam Roberts after a long period of commitment.
There was some controversy about Tommy's transfer to Pinehurst. We felt it was too close to the site of his childhood trauma, but funding was tight.
There's insight into why his mental state hasn't improved.
Well, they've given him every treatment, every therapy they can think of. It's a wonder his mind isn't fried with all the drugs they've given him.
What's worse, he coincidentally arrives when a hot-headed resident goes off the deep end. I surmised previously that the power conspired to use Vic to slay the ill-fated Joey. putting Tommy in the crosshairs of another murder spree by setting off the rather placid but bad-tempered Roy Burns. The forces that be obviously wanted to turn the screw. I wrote before, the powers likely either wanted to claim Tommy using Roy, or just force him to once again commit murder by stopping Roy, so he would be driven to himself have a taste for bloodletting and become the killer, getting him back for killing Jason by despoiling his very soul. The film's finale implies Tommy goes off the deep end too. And that getting thrown in a blender again pushed him right off a precipice into psycho killer territory.
Relax, honey. You were just having a crazy nightmare.
There's a lot to suggest this was all a dream sequence. Ending Friday the 13th films with a dream sequence was a hallmark of the early days. But if not a phantasm...
He went totally buggo. He had a hockey mask on, he was running down the hallways with a knife in his hand. I think he honestly thought the spirit of Jason had taken him over.
Kim talked Tommy down, and from there he improved enough to make a friend and learn to drive.
If the institution ever found out about this, they would haul our butts back in and straitjacket them. Permanent.
You didn't have to come, Oz. This is between me and Jason.
Jason Lives picks up with him in what looks like Pam's truck, on his way to Jason's grave. His intention's clear.
Seeing it won't, but destroying it will. Jason belongs in hell. I'm gonna see he gets there.
Instead, Tommy ends up committing the most egregious act. I went on to write in my previous video, when the power failed to control him because Tommy ultimately overcame the darkness, and instead needled him to dig up Jason's body through continued hallucinations, leading to the main man's revivification via lightning bolt. It was a cruel twist indeed, turning Tommy from hero with issues into the dumb sap who not only freed Jason from his dirt prison, but also carried out the action that led to his resurrection. Even if he was able to put Jason in a watery grave in Crystal Lake, the damage was done. Jason was out of the ground and it was certain he would wreak havoc in the future. Though it would be easy to blame Tommy for all the deaths that came after the unearthing of Jason, something he should have known better than to do from his own nightmares. I think there's reason not to lay all the blame at his feet, because that's the thing. In his dream, Jason is barely buried, a clear indicator he remains permanently at the surface of Tommy's mind, something exploitable, because even without meddling forces, the fear of Jason was ever present. This positioned Tommy to be easily manipulated into being a tool, and can you really blame him for trying to exorcise that demon? He probably would have drilled a hole in his head if he thought it would get Jason out of there.
I hate it.
Evidence of the supernatural aside, they couldn't have people knowing rotted corpses can crawl out of their graves.
That's the cockamamie story that he came up with. He went running into Sheriff Garris's office, screaming up a blue streak, insisting that Jason was alive. Garris wasn't the type to suffer that kind of bullshit, so...
It would legitimize that the Higgins Haven killer seemingly rose from the dead.
Whoever killed those people at the Jarvis house that weekend sure as hell wasn't the same person who escaped from the morgue. Could have been an accomplice or another copycat. It sure as hell wasn't Jason Voorhees.
Even if they were approaching the statute of limitations on civil liability, the court of public opinion is always litigating, besides the possibility of other things.
So, the murders begin anew, and you've got Chicken Little Tommy Jarvis running around town saying, Jason's back, scaring the hell out of everybody, when the most likely suspect in these murders, Tommy Jarvis. Bottom line is, there was enough evidence linking Jarvis to the Forest Green murders for Sheriff Garris to detain him. Now, whether he was acting alone, whether he had an accomplice, we don't know.
That is total bullpoop.
The thing is, somewhere there's official documentation that the killer who attacked the Jarvises is Jason Voorhees, because despite the myth of cremation being perpetuated, the body was eventually released. Jason's father maybe had to sue to get the body, and even though a judge handed it over to him, the official story was that someone other than Jason committed the murder spree Tommy ended. Perhaps non-disclosure agreements were put in place, which is why even a mayor would believe Jason was cremated.
Jason Voorhees is dead! His body was cremated. He's nothing but a handful of ash.
And local youth aren't sure of Jason's authenticity.
Just because our parents keep telling us that Jason was only a legend doesn't mean it wasn't true. What if he did come back here?
You'd think parents would enjoy using the Jason mythos to keep their kids honest, ergo celibate, the way Native Americans use stories of lake monsters to keep their children from swimming too deep. Like, the whole thing may have hurt the community's reputation to a degree, and drew some dangerous.
We got tourists coming from all over the world looking for this Jason. We got rednecks with rifles organizing their weekend Jason hunting trips. Got a constant problem with kids. They're trespassing on the condemned campgrounds.
And weird.
Weirdest thing we got is a freaking cult of Jason worshippers. They pray to the guy.
Elements, but it takes more than that to tank a local economy.
Well, who gives two shits either way?
I'm guessing backroom shenanigans were going on that hurt the area, and the murders were a good scapegoat and distraction. Except for one problem, the kid unwilling to keep his mouth shut short of being muzzled. If the corruption did indeed run deeper, fear of civil lawsuits opening up the books would have been motivation enough to remove as much of Tommy's credibility as possible.
He was behind bars, so how's he supposed to commit those murders?
Astral projection?
Voodoo? Telekinesis?
Well, not the way we saw it. Tommy Jarvis, he was a wanted murderer. He fled and he hasn't been seen since.
The saddest part is that Tommy was obviously improving in other ways, and another encounter with Jason, now zombified and all but unstoppable, likely set him back quite a bit. And why was he so much more put together in Jason Lives? Pam didn't turn her back on him, and maybe offered the nurturing he so sorely needed. It's clear Tommy wasn't being treated so much as controlled. When he fell into the hands of Matt and Pam, they could have been the first compassionate and caring people he encountered since the Jason ordeal toppled his life like a Jenga tower. Where the films leave him, Tommy is a tragic figure, existing as commentary on the unfairness of life. By chance he ran afoul of Jason and whatever dark hoodoo aids and imbues him with endless sustainability. For being the one to for a time slay the beast's physical form, inadvertently inviting a multi-pronged retaliation, resulting in recrimination, confinement, accusation, and a soul-strafing amount of proximity to brutal murder, he incurred a lifetime of undeserved punishment. What's the lesson in all this?
It's got a death curse!
Right, Ralph was, but it pertains to way more than Camp Crystal Lake, infiltrating and permeating up to and including the local government, and applies to the entire area. All things considered, if you were to say own land in or around Crystal Lake, I'd suggest contacting a realtor. The housing prices there aren't getting any better. Well, I've about reached the end of the rope, so I won't leave you dangling.
Bless you, sir.
Thanks for hearing out my ramblings. Please share any refutations, opinions, accusations, japes, or other ideas in the comments below. And please join me for whatever I'm up to next time. Bye now.
Pew, 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 pew.